This is a copyrighted edition of our video channel with Godwin as owner of this channel. Please like, comment or share this video before his home internet is cut. Suicide is the second leading cause of deaths, after accidents, among young people ages 15 to 24 since at least 2000, according to CBC News article published in 2024, titled Suicide is Leading Cause of Death for Young People but most universities don't track it. But what most people might not know is back in 2015, 3 psychologists, Dr. Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jeff McDonald and Dr. Roman Taffaroti supported their student Godwin to raise $20 million so a place could be created where he could teach students solution to loneliness for most people. But spotlight of this fundraising campaign was on an article written by Godwin based on his ongoing research on wisdom and loneliness in North America since 2001, saying suicide as second leading cause of death for youth in Canada had been mentioned in 1985, which is 40 years ago. This suggested whatever was done to prevent youth suicide hasn't made much change in Canada. His article said suicide is the problem and loneliness is major underlying factor. The reason is simple as depression is most common among suicidal people. But according to 2 psychiatrists, we noticed most of our patients were more comfortable saying they were depressed than saying they were lonely because talking about loneliness is deeply stigmatized. Another way of putting this is depressed people tend to feel lonely but lonely people tend to be depressed. But a study by 5 doctors found chronic loneliness made people reported feeling hopeless and helpless, plus the fact that these people were living in seniors' home and had someone to talk to daily proved having someone to talk to is no cure for helping people to get out of loneliness. In addition, according to another CBC News article, nearly 70% of students battle loneliness during school year, survey says. Except until today most people still don't know it was a national survey done in Canada. Or that there are 2 kinds of loneliness, short-term loneliness and chronic loneliness. The first tends to go away on its own. But the second could stay with a person for months or years, so from the wording of this CBC News article, we can see it was about chronic loneliness. However, this study by 5 doctors mentioned could suggest students with chronic loneliness might also be feeling hopeless and helpless. Altogether, this could help explain why chronic loneliness can be viewed as a major factor for youth suicide. Now, let's try to understand hopeless and helpless that chronically lonely people were reported feeling, is not that they did not receive help, but it is more the help that they received could not help them to get out of loneliness. So what could be reason that the help they received did not work to help them get out of loneliness? Reason might be because those who offered help did not know how to help most people to get out of loneliness. A good analogy is when you needed an apple, but the people who were helping you kept giving you orange. Sooner or later, you too could feel hopeless and helpless for unable to get the apple you need from those who should be helping you to get it. So how does this tie in with Godwin's solution to loneliness, you might ask? Well, Godwin's solution to loneliness can be said as first and probably only tested solution to loneliness supported by psychologists and professors, what never happened in Canada. Just like Dr. John Verveek who created 4 courses on wisdom, both Wisdom Lab director Dr. Michelle Ferrari and clinical psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson agreed a wisdom master is someone whose job is to help students to acquire wisdom, and wisdom tends to be taught through master and apprentice relationship or learned through following instruction coming from the master. But the person that was hired by Dr. Ferrari to do the job of helping students to acquire wisdom through instruction is Godwin, after receiving recommendation by Dr. Verveek for Godwin to be hired, plus knowing Dr. Verveek was supervisor for 3 years testing of Godwin's solution and after hearing Dr. Peterson believes Godwin has found loneliness solution for most people in North America. And after knowing Canada Research Chair Dr. Katrina Scott said Godwin's research contains some super strong or solid ideas that North Americans in general include psychologists and professors are blind to that can help move forward the work to helping most students to get out of loneliness. The problem is people in general, especially students tend to refuse to follow Godwin's instruction but they often rather follow instruction or advice by those who keep getting paid but still fail to help most students to get out of loneliness. So what could be the reason for that, other than students were foolish or didn't know better? What Harvard researcher and professor of education Howard Gardner said could help shed light on the issue. According to Gardner, such a description of the failing of school may be accurate as far as it goes, but in my view it does not go nearly far enough. Evidence for this startling claim comes from a by now overwhelming body of educational research that has been assembled over the last decades. These investigations document that even students who have been well trained and who exhibit all the overt signs of success, faithful attendance at good schools, high grades and high test scores, typically do not display an adequate understanding of the material and concepts they have been working on. This habit of mind is not absent from political leaders. Those who have studied intricacies of modern poetry show little capacity to distinguish masterworks from amateurish drivel once the identity of the author has been hidden from view. In other words, what Gardner was saying is due to decline in quality of education. From students to political leaders tend to lack ability to tell differences between master and amateur, which is a sign their learning ability is not as good as we may want to think. So what is the evidence for Godwin for linking student loneliness with a lack of learning ability for most people due to a drop in the quality of education? The evidence can be found by watching his 2 videos, Solution to Loneliness is Not What You Think Part 1 and 2. But I will briefly summarize, that is, 99.9% of people Godwin had encountered from 2012 to 2025 has one thing in common: they all refused to follow Godwin's instruction. Some tried to offer instruction for Godwin to follow, as if Godwin should view them as masters or need their approval for Godwin's instruction to work. Others would try to convince Godwin why they were correct and keep doing whatever they were doing, without making room for change, to help ending student loneliness. When 99.9% of students all rather doing nothing, they should know ending student loneliness is therefore impossible. However, when you pay attention to people include students trying to be helpful telling Godwin to go do this or that, you might realize they only added more work for Godwin to do, but he needed the opposite. They seem to have ignored the fact that Godwin was hired to offer people his instruction but not hired to follow people's instruction, in order to put end to student loneliness. According to social psychologist Eric Fromm, this is due to people exhibit no behavior change after listening, as from used phrase, students, and the content of teaching remain strangers to each other, to describe when students failed to learn teaching offered to them.